not very often we get a look behind the curtain of game development, especially with games as secretive as Sonic 3. We know they split it into Sonic 3 and Sonic & Knuckles due to time constraints, and we know Michael Jackson was secretly involved with the composition of many zones. But it seems footage of a prototype dating back to October of 1993 has surfaced online. This is courtesy of Hidden Palace on YouTube and Twitch. Now this may only be 4 months before the game's official release, but it has some drastic differences from the final version. Perhaps one of the biggest is this 1993 build of Sonic 3 actually has the drop dash. That's right, the mechanic that wouldn't officially debut or even be spoke of until 2017 Sonic Mania was actually a scrap mechanic from Sonic 3. In this build, the insta-shield is nowhere to be found, so it's very likely they scrapped the drop dash in favour of it very late into development. It comes to reason that Christian Whitehead and his team either saw this build for themselves, or they were told about the scrap mechanic by Sega. But I can't find any record of the drop dash being mentioned by Sega before Sonic Mania, and even then we weren't told it was a scrap mechanic. Now another fascinating thing is the music. As I'm sure many of you know, there's clear evidence that Michael Jackson was brought on to compose many zones for this game, likely after the success of Sega's Moonwalker game. But following accusations, Sega distanced themselves from Jackson in the lead up to Sonic 3. With that said, tracks like Ice Cap have a striking resemblance to Smooth Criminal, and also Who Is It? And Carnival Night has strong implications of Jam. All tracks with hints of Jackson were suspiciously changed in the PC version, which launched 3 years later in 1997. But is changed the right word? Take a listen. Yeah, the PC soundtrack is actually the original soundtrack, and we're hearing it now for the first time in the Genesis font. The PC version didn't take out Jackson music, but actually reverted back to how the tracks were initially composed. This is a rather stunning discovery, as the soundtrack is often speculated as the reason why Sonic 3 can't be re-released. After all, the last official re-release was around 10 years ago now. But the original soundtrack isn't even the original soundtrack. Now those two are definitely the biggest finds in this build, but there's a ton of interesting tidbits to see too. For one, there's many traces of Sonic & Knuckles levels in this build of Sonic 3. Flying Battery is selectable and playable, although it's an extremely early version. There's no enemies, and the majority of level design isn't quite complete. In fact, even navigate it, you kind of need debug mode on. And following that, Lava Reef Zone doesn't appear on the menu, but a pretty late version does exist in the game, and it's playable. There's issues with collision, and it's clearly not finished yet, but this is without a doubt Lava Reef Zone. Mushroom Valley and Sandopolis are also on the level select screen, Mushroom Valley almost certainly being Mushroom Hill. Unfortunately, they can't be selected and nothing happens when you choose them. Although the majority of Sonic & Knuckles music can be heard in this version. Take a listen to these early versions. So it seems Sonic & Knuckles was already away into development while Sonic 3 was being finished. Maybe they were aiming for a complete package. The opening is also very different. Instead of being supersonic, Sonic now just kind of surfs onto Angel Island until he's confronted by Knuckles. But he doesn't actually collect any of the emeralds, so it's probably an unfinished animation. Quite obviously, the prototype is still using Sonic 2 sprites for Sonic and Tails, but it does actually have some new animations. This swinging sprite, for instance, is entirely new, and it's used both for ropes and also in being carried by Tails, who, by the way, can seemingly fly forever in this build. Although interestingly, the competition mode still uses the final Sonic 3 sprite, and this sprite can use the drop dash just like the rest of the prototype. Being unfinished, there's of course a lot of glitches over the course of the playthrough, with music randomly cutting out, missing sprites, and a lot of peculiar oddities. In terms of what's just not finished, the floating blocks and hydrosity don't cause the sprites to rotate around, and Ice Cap doesn't start with a snowboard. Instead, Sonic just kinda runs down the hill. And sometimes the game's just not playable, like the boss in Marble Zone just destroys the floor and kills Sonic outright, which honestly, that's a pretty good idea on Eggman's part. And even once mini-bosses have been defeated, the transitions don't exist and the zone can't end. Shields also have no effect beyond just being shields. The fire shield isn't immune to fire, and the bubble shield won't protect you underwater. You'll also notice some levels have completely different routes and layouts. Whereas in some instances, Knuckles' route can be accessed while being Sonic. The background hydrosity zone is completely different, whereas Launch Base has a purple sky and a green death egg. So these are all really cool changes, both big and small, and it shows you just how much Sonic 3 changed in those 4 months up until its launch. The music, the level design, and even Sonic's abilities were changed in those 4 months. Very crazy compared to modern development. But what do you guys think about this prototype version? We'll have a link to a playthrough in the description below, but until then, let us know what you think down below, and of course be sure to subscribe to Game Explain for a lot more on Sonic and other things gaming too. Until next time, bye!